Hello, good afternoon. Happy Thursday. Welcome, welcome. And welcome that way. Awesome to see you. Very good. So we are going to be getting back into Journeys Out of the Body by Robert A. Monroe, a classic work on out-of-body experience. And dang, it's good. It's so good. So we're going into chapter 10 today, and it's called Intelligent Animals. So let's see. Let's do it. Intelligent Animals, Chapter 10. Throughout man's history, the reports have been consistent. There are demons, spirits, goblins, gremlins, and assorted subhuman entities always hanging around humanity to make life miserable. Are these myths? Hallucinations? Why is that? I was kind of struggle on that one. Hallucinations? For once, suppose we don't dismiss the topic before we take a good long look. Perhaps all such things do originate in the imagination. The question is, from what source does the imagination conjure up these beings? The following excerpts from the notes offer several possibilities. Hey, cool gamer, welcome. All right. April 18th, 1960, morning. I lay down on the couch around 10 and started fractional relaxation. The room was bright in morning daylight. Halfway through the second time around, the vibrations started. After a moment of tuning with my jaw, I opened my physical eyes to see if the vibrations would continue. They did. With physical eyes open, I decided to try and lift out to see what happened to my vision. The clock was in full view. My time orientation was normal, according to the second hand. I was just about 8 inches over the physical when I saw a movement out of the corner of my eye. Walking up beside my body was a human-appearing body. I could see only the lower half with my head in the position on its side by turning my eyes to the right. It was nude, no clothes, and male. He seemed in size to be about 10 years old, some 3 feet tall, thin legs, little pubic hair, undeveloped genitals. Calmly, as if it were a daily occurrence, like a boy swinging into his favorite horse, he swung a leg over my back and climbed on me. I could feel his legs around my waist, his small body pressed against my back. I was so completely surprised that it didn't occur to me to be afraid. Perhaps his size had something to do with that. I waited rigidly, and by rolling my eyes to the right, I could see his right leg hanging over my body, less than 2 feet away. It looked like a perfectly normal 10-year-old boy's leg. I was still hovering just out of the physical and cautiously wondering who and what this was. He seemed completely unaware that I knew of his presence, or if he was, he didn't care. I felt that I didn't want to confront whoever he was in an environment where he was obviously more at home than I, so I retreated quickly back into my physical body, cut down the vibrations, and started to write these notes. I don't know what it was. I realized that I simply didn't have the courage to turn around and get a good look at him, if I could have. It was certainly humanoid in form, but upon reflection, it didn't have the feeling of human intelligence. It, or he, seemed more animal, or somewhere in between. I felt insulted at the complete assurance with which he came over and climbed on my back. He seemed confident that he would not be detected, perhaps through long association with humans to whom he was invisible. If it was a hallucination, that's very real imagining, in broad daylight, with the second hand of the clock sweeping, and with two senses reporting. Two senses reporting. Hey, Alex! Oh my gosh, so good to see you, Steve! Welcome! Dude, this book's juicy. So good. Was that the end of the entry? That was the end of the entry. April 28th, 1960, night. About 7:30 in the office, I went through the counter procedure. Okay, let's try again. About 7:30 in the office, I went through the count out procedure, and the vibrations came in nicely. I started out carefully and felt something climb on my back. I remembered the little fellow from before and certainly didn't want to try to go somewhere with him hanging on my back. I let the vibrations continue and reached down my side to get hold of his leg, not sure that my non physical hand wouldn't go right through it. I was quite surprised when my hands did touch something. The consistency felt much like flesh, normal body warm, and somewhat rubbery. It seemed to stretch. I pulled, and the more I pulled, the more it stretched. I finally pulled what I thought was all of it off my back, except for a leg, which seemed to be under my body. I finally got that out too, and pushed the entire mass onto the shelf beside the couch. It still seemed very much alive. It seemed to be trying to get back on me, and I had to hold it away. It got to be quite a struggle. No viciousness on his part, just an effort to get back on top of me. And I was getting a little panicky. I was in over my head again. I thought of lighting matches and trying to burn him up or do something, to do something, anything. There seemed no way to prevent him from climbing back on me until the moment I re entered the physical. Man, this is like a familiar or something? I wonder. This is fascinating. Having talked the last episode over with various people, I followed their various instructions. I tried to stay calm, but it wasn't easy. I crossed myself several times with no effect. I repeated the Lord's Prayer fervently, but that didn't hold him at bay. Then I screamed for help. Then, as I was trying to hold off the first, a second climbed on my back. Holding the first off with one hand, I reached back and yanked the second off me and floated over to the center of the office. Holding one in each hand, screaming for help, I got a good look at each, and as I looked, each turned into a good facsimile of one of my two daughters. The psychiatrists will have a good time with this one. I seemed to know immediately that this was a deliberate camouflage on their parts to create emotional confusion in me and call upon my love for my daughters to prevent my doing anything more to them. The moment I realized the trick, the two no longer appeared to be my daughters. Desperate for a solution, I thought about fire, and this seemed to help a little. However, I got the impression that they were both amused, as if there was nothing I could do to harm them. By this time, I was sobbing for help. Then I saw someone else coming up out of the corner of my eye. I first thought it was another one, but this was very definitely a man. He simply stopped a short distance away and watched what was taking place with a very serious expression on his face. I got a very good look at him. First, his eyes were very familiar to me. They reminded me somewhat of a paternal cousin's, light in color, a little sunken. At first, his eyes were very familiar to me. They reminded me somewhat of a paternal cousin's, light in color, a little sunken. Okay, I'm on the page. He had his hair cut evenly around his head, including bangs across his forehead and short across the pate, almost bald. Pate? He wore a dark robe to his ankles. I could not see his feet. Okay, we're on to the next paragraph. But pate, across the pate, short, and short across the pate, almost bald. Bangs. Pate, P-A-T-E. Let's find out. Beep. Pate. Definition. Archaic, humorous, a person's head. He scratched his balding pate.
Pate.
Pate. Cool. New word for head. I like it. Cool. Hey, where's that word? Oh, no. Okay, yeah. He wore a dark robe down to his ankles. I could not see his feet. All right, back to YouTube's. My first reaction was that he had come to help the entities, and that frightened me even more. I was still sobbing when he slowly approached us. I was down on my knees, arms outstretched, holding off the two little beings. The man was very serious, spoke not a word to me, nor did he even seem to look in my direction. When he came close, I stopped my struggling and sank to the floor, pleading for help. Still with no recognition of me, he picked up each of the little beings, cradled one in each arm, and looked down at them. As he held them, they seemed to relax and go limp, limbs and necks drooping. Sobbing my thanks, I moved over to the couch, slipped into the physical, still feeling the vibrations, and sat up physical and looked around. The room was empty. After a 24-hour contemplation of the event, I have at least some speculation. There is the possibility that the entire thing could have been hallucination or dream superimposed over my complete consciousness. If so, I can see how those with paranoia have great difficulty in choosing which is reality. If it is symbolism, it is fairly evident. The entities around me are no more than a product of me. The visualization of them as my children is pretty hard to interpret in any other way than to show they are mine. I created them, my children. Therefore, they belong to me and are neither good nor bad. I still don't know what they are. Are they disassociated parts of me or thought entities I have created from continuing thought patterns habitually? What do I do about them? Who does the man in the robe represent? This will take more than 24 hours to understand. However, the next time, if there is one, I certainly will try to maintain a more calm objectivity, less fear, and an analytical approach. Dang it, this guy is so cool, right? May 21st, 1960, night. I was lying deeply relaxed, late evening, in the bedroom. The vibrations started evenly, and I quickly noticed the small leg thrown over my body, non physical, I assume. I felt the small body hanging onto my back. Carefully, I reached around, non physical, and felt the small back superimposed on mine. I patted the little shoulder gently, intending understanding, and carefully lifted the small body and pushed it away from mine. I waited, and it didn't come back or attempt to come near. Not wanting to push my luck, I re entered the physical, sat up, and made these notes. May 27th, 1960, night. After lifting out, I again felt what I knew to be one of the rubbery entities on my back. No words or actions, just the small body clinging warmly to my back. This time I did not get too frightened and managed to pull at the thing slowly. I pulled and called to God to help me. At the instance of at the insistence of several people who are more theologically inclined than I. Again, the thing stretched as I pulled, but didn't come off completely. I remembered the visualized thought of fire, and that it hadn't seemed much use, but had helped a little. This time, I tried thinking of electricity. I visualized two pieces of highly charged wire. I mentally struck them into the side of that part of the entity that I had pulled off. Immediately, the mass deflated, went limp, and seemed to die. As it did, a bat like thing squeaked past my head and went out the window. I felt that I had won. I felt deep relief and went back down into the physical, reintegrated, and sat up physically. He never readdressed that one time when he was going into locale 3, and he saw something fly by him, and he thought that it was going to be an entity that was entering his body, and then he ended up in that window. um he never mentioned, I guess we know everything he does. Well, I mean, obviously not, but I keep wondering about it. What was it? August 25th, 1960, night. It happened again this trip. Just as I was getting underway, several things attached themselves to various parts of my body, non physical. I say things because It was in total darkness, and I wouldn't or couldn't see. They seemed almost like small fish, about 8 or 10 inches long, and they attached themselves like the parasitic sucker fish in the ocean. I pulled them off and pushed them away as best I could, but they, or others, came back immediately. They weren't vicious, just troublesome. Finally, I went back in the physical to get rid of them. November 3rd, 1961, night. I've discovered something new about the suckers. There is almost a layer of them. Sometimes you pass through it, but most of the time you don't. Or you move through so fast it is not noticed. This time I stopped right in the middle of the layer as the fish came clustering around, attracted by me. Instead of reacting as before, I simply waited, completely immobile. After a few moments, they detached themselves and moved away. Then there was nothing, just blackness. I started to move, and back they came. I stopped, waited, and again they moved away. This time I moved slowly. One or two came back, but that is all. I then went upward and on to the other places. It was as if I were bait in an ocean of fish. Hey, Tom, welcome. Ambrita, I didn't even know. Awesome. Very cool. Awesome. Welcome. July 13th, 1960, night. This must be recorded, as it may contribute in some way. In hotel room in Durham with my wife in bed beside me late at night. I was just about to fall asleep when I sensed someone or something in the room. Without realizing at first what had happened, I rushed up out of bed to defend myself and my wife. Immediately, I was attacked by something I couldn't see in the darkness. I fought at the animal level, i.e., tried to bite and scratch, and for what seemed an eternity, we fought in 3 dimensions through the room. I could not see in the darkened room or where my eyes closed, and it was only through sheer determination that I fought it step by step over to the window and hurled it out. It apparently had no human or intelligence characteristics. It seemed pure animal and about 4 feet long, like a large dog. By the window, after disposing of it, I turned and realized for the first time that I was not in the physical. My hand was right through the closed window. I floated over the bed, and there were 2 bodies laying under the covers. I moved close to the watch on the night table and could see by the luminous dial that it was 2:35. I remembered that I was closest to the night table and floated over, went down, rotated, and was back in. I sat up physically, and the room was quiet, dark, and empty. I looked at the watch on the night table. The time was about 2:38. Hmm, so fascinating. Tanya, welcome everyone. October 27th, 1960, night. Went to bed tired, late, around 1:30 a.m., and mentally set myself to have no activities. Just as I started to sleep, no consciousness lapse in sequence, no separation from physical noticeable, but I did feel a sense of release just prior. I was attacked by something. I had no apparent personality, nor was I able to see it. Oh, it had no apparent personality, nor was I able to see it. However, I know this one was incredibly vicious, with an intent to take something that was mine, which first required getting rid of me. Not necessarily the physical I, but the I who has the ability to act independently of the physical. This struggle was not like fending off an animal. It was a no holds barred affair, silent, terrifyingly fast, and with the other seeking out any weakness on my part. I did not fight back savagely at first because I was bewildered. I merely tried to defend myself. However, the thing fighting me seemed to move from nerve center to nerve center, and some of the holds and pressures it applied were excruciating. I knew that if I did not fight back, I would lose, and losing seemed as vital as losing existence. I then started to fight back with equal intensity, savagely, and with desperation. The thing fighting me knew very knew every weak spot and used them. We fought for what seemed like hours, and gradually I felt I might truly lose. I felt that this couldn't go on forever and realized that I was somehow out of the physical. Still fighting, I steered the battle in the direction of my physical. When we were very close and directly over it, I dropped back in. It was the only way I could think of to end the fight without losing. I opened my eyes physically and sat up. The room was quiet and empty. The bedclothes were undisturbed, so evidently there was no actual physical motion involved. My wife slept beside me undisturbed. I got up and walked around the room, looked in the hall. Everything appeared normal. It could have been a dream. If so, it was most vivid and certainly did not follow the usual pattern of dreams that I have. I have long come to recognize pure release type dreams, which reflect the day's tensions or long felt inner anxieties, which can be likened to multiple feedback or monkey chatter. The superimposure of the room perfectly as the background for the action plus conscious control of action tends to negate the dream concept. Delaney, awesome, welcome in. After some 20 minutes of calming myself down, I returned to bed. I was naturally reluctant immediately to try to sleep again. I did not want a reoccurrence of the fight. I knew of no way to prevent it. I tried what seemed to be the only answer. The alternative was to stay awake all night, and I was much too tired. I lay there and repeated, "My mind and body are open only to constructive forces. In the name of God and good, I am going to normal, restful sleep." I did, and awoke at my usual time in the morning. Before sleep came, I had repeated the phrase at least 20 times. The phrase, "My mind and body are open only to constructive forces. In the name of God and good, I am going into normal, restful sleep." The use of such phrasing indicates the seriousness and concern I felt at the time, which will be recognized by those who know me well, in that I felt the need to look for help and protection in the manner that I did. In truth, there was no alternative whatsoever. In retrospect, I still cannot find an alternative, nor do I know of any method, place, person, religious practice that I would be sure of, drug, or anything else in my mind of knowledge, experience, or information that would absolutely guarantee protection against whatever attacked me. However, there must be something other than the pure fighting back and self defense, even if you don't know what you're fighting. It was the same defense mechanism you would use if you were attacked by an animal at night in the jungle. You don't stop to find a way to fight in the middle of the night. You don't stop to find out what attacked you. You fight to save yourself with what you have now, the moment the animal attacks. You fight desperately, not thinking at the time how to fight, why you fight, whom you fight. You have been attacked. The unprovoked attack in itself seems to indicate to you that whatever is attacking you is not good, or else it would not attack you in this manner. Defense is automatic, instinctive, with no thought except survival, which is based on the premise that it is wrong to surrender to someone or something whose qualities, apparent, apparent unprovoked attack, blind desire to kill, you abhor. 201. Of late, visits from the demons have been infrequent. Wow. I wonder what was going on in his life at that time. Yeah, me too. Monkey chatter. 11. Gift or burden? It's a question. Gift or burden? 11. All right. Early in the experimentation, a side effect began to manifest itself. It was not an out of body activity as such, but took place in states of deep relaxation prior to any separation. It is evidently called in the trade precognition. As I was lying down, my mind stilled and body relaxed. Without my volition, the vision would occur. There would be a hissing sound, localized in the forebrain, and I would get the sensation of a small rectangular door hinged at one end, swinging downward to an angle of about 45 degrees. This exposed a perfectly round hole. Immediately thereafter, I would see and semi experience an event or incident like a dream, except that I retained all of my consciousness and sense awareness. The dream would be superimposed directly over outside stimuli. I could perceive both quite readily. I could perceive both quite readily. I could not I could not and cannot produce the effect at will. It merely happened or was triggered by some non conscious mechanism. At first, I paid no particular attention to the phenomenon, attributing the dream visions to release of material from the unconscious. A major event brought it strongly to my attention. It is important enough to take directly from the notes. July 5th, 1959. During the early morning, the valve opened again, and what I saw has concerned me only because it was so vivid. I was about to board a commercial airplane. Standing by the door of the plane, waiting was DD, a man I've known for more than 10 years. I got on the plane and took a seat. I noticed that there were plenty of seats and the plane was almost ready to go, so I was sure my friend would make it aboard. I noticed a group talking up in front near the door, and they joined a young Negro man who had just come in the door. They were very jolly and were glad the young Negro was going along. The group was composed of two older Negro men, an older white man, and the young Negro. Damn, Bean, it's so weird to use these terms like this. They noticed that the plane was about to leave, so they all went down the aisle past me and took their seats. I leaned forward to see if my friend would get on, and in doing so, I became aware that the woman in front of me was agitated. Just as the plane was starting, my friend got aboard and took a seat. I was about to get up and go over to join him when the plane started to move and I sat back. The plane started down the runway and seemed to take a long time to get off, and I grew a little tense. We finally took off, and we climbed low over boulevard streets, winding with cloverleaf intersections. We stayed at low altitude, and the plane climbed very little. In a few moments, I heard the stewardess speaking through the plane's speaker system. She stated that in a few minutes the pilot would decide whether to take the plane in one of two routes, the one to the left going around, or the under the wire route. After a few moments' wait, I noticed that the plane passed a given point, low over a city, and I realized before the hostess spoke again that we were taking the under the wire route. When the hostess announced it, her voice seemed a bit too light and too casual, and I could sense a slight tension in her too. Looking out the plane window, I saw the area ahead with wires stretched out in every direction. The plane approached and went under the wires, staying very low. I was tense and watched ahead, looking for openings in the wires that we could climb up through. Then up ahead, I could see the end of the wires over us, and there was a sunlight beyond. I began to relax slightly because it looked like we were going to make it. At the moment, the plane dropped suddenly and bounced against the street. As it did, something broke off the plane very near me, and I jumped, or fell, to the street some 6 or 8 feet below me. I watched where I had fallen as the plane moved upward and away from me after the bounce, and then plunged off to the right and into an empty space between two buildings. Huge clouds of smoke partially obscured the crash. My first reaction after the crash was to thank God for the miracle that saved me. The second was that my family would be worried because they knew I had taken this flight, and that I should get word to them. The third was that I should hurry over to the wrecked plane and try to save some of the others, even though I knew it was of no use. I got up and went over to the plane wreck, and as I approached, I could see flames through the smoke. The pilot, in leather jacket and cap, walked up and looked at me rather dazedly and asked why I all wait wait and looked at me rather dazedly and asked why I, of all his passengers, should be picked as the one to be saved. I asked this question myself. Then the valve closed. Wow. I wonder if that's that male spot that Eileen Day McCusick talks about. July 24th, 1959. I'm about to leave on what may be the first of 4 plane trips. This first will be to North Carolina. At the thought of the trip, I have a shaky feeling. This has made me pause to think, and in view of other incidents, to review the experience related on the 5th. I am always slightly concerned when I travel by airplane, as I believe everyone is. I do not think anything is going to happen on the North Carolina trip, but I may have the wrong interpretation. But what do I do if a similar incident occurs at the beginning of one of these 3 trips, an exact parallel to the July 7th, 59 incident? Do I get off the plane, or is it impossible to break the pattern? My reading states that I will survive, but survival may mean, in this case, death transition, or that I see death not as death, but I am still alive. I honestly do not know what I will do. However, to all who love me, and I hope there are many, in the event that there is such an incident, and that the proper interpretation means that I do experience death transition rather than continuing life here, please do not be unhappy over it, for I honestly deeply feel that it is a transition. And much as I will regret the many things that I would never do here, some deep nostalgia, some great longing that I have tried to fulfill in a fumbling way here, I believe will again become actuality if I go home. For more than ever, I believe that the physical body is but a machine for the use of I. Therefore, once I have departed, the body should mean nothing. No grave, no vault. The body as such is unimportant. I am not there. Dang. That way, welcome back. I don't know if you've been here the whole time, but I saw you were here right at the get. October 23rd, 1958. This is written some 12 weeks after the previous entry. Four of the 12 weeks were spent in a hospital, the remainder in a recuperative period at home. But first things first. Wow. The previous entry found me concerned with what seemed to be a problem of portent, and the definition of survival. By comparison with the dream, here is how it worked out. Recognition 1. I started on the trip, as indicated, a trip to North Carolina. The first indication of similarity occurred when I got into the bus that takes passengers from the New York airline terminal to Newark Airport. I entered and sat down on the right, in the second seat from the front. Sitting there, I was overwhelmed with a sense of familiarity. It was the position I was in relative to the door, and the pattern of the door rail and the door shield. This made me alert, as I thoroughly recognized this placement as what I originally interpreted in their precognition as the airplane. It was not the airplane, it was the bus to the airport. Recognition 2. 4 men entered the bus, 3 in dark suits, 1 in light, laughing and joking. See either comparison, interpretation before as Negro and white. Recognition 3. A woman took the seat directly in front of me. She became very uncomfortable and agitated. However, it was not because of me, but because of the porters handling one of her packages outside. Recognition 4. The impression of my friend Dee Dee standing by the door waiting, the last to get on. I looked out where the bus driver was waiting beside the door for any last-minute passengers. His face and build reminded me instantly of my friend. Enough to be his brother. Photographic verification of this was to come. The mind, when unable to identify truly, picks the nearest thing to it in the mind's experience. This is wild. Wow, it's like echoes of things. What does that pretend to destiny then? It's like impressions of things, especially if time is all now. And then things with greater impressions stick with us. Sometimes I think that's why we get that sense of kismet and nostalgia when we meet new people or people that mean a lot to us. It's like we feel the impressions of the things of the future, even though they haven't happened for the us in the here now. He then got in, closed the door, the last to enter, and slipped into the driver's seat almost directly opposite me. Recognition 5. In taking the Jersey Turnpike, the bus flies low and slow, or that could be the impression if compared to flying. The turnpike is built over most of the surrounding streets and roads. As I looked at the unfolding roads and curving boulevards as we traveled above them, the instant sense of familiarity and recognition came again. Only it was not the airplane, the original mistaken concept, but the bus. Recognition 6. At the airport, I was quite alert after the early signs. The plane was late in arriving, so I waited around the lobby. As I sat on a bench, I heard a woman's voice speaking of East and West concourse over the Pennsylvania system. Oh, no, not Pennsylvania, but the PA system. Um, the hollowness of the sound was again strongly familiar. East and West, left and right. Recognition 7. When the plane finally did load, a momentarily debated I momentarily debated whether or not to take it, not from fear, but because of the uncertainty of what survival meant. I finally decided that it was unavoidable, that if I waited for a second flight, it would only prolong the incident. I boarded the plane, very alert, and we taxied out for takeoff. Then the hostess announced on the intercom that we would fly at 6,000 feet. That confirmed the low altitude. We finally took off and promptly ran into a thunderstorm with a great deal of lightning display. This confirmed the impression of an under the wires electricity flight, long and recognizable symbol to me. Midway during the storm, the pilot decided to change altitude. This was not announced, but we flew up out of the storm and landed in North Carolina without incident. Upon landing, I decided that my interpretation of the accident was wrong and promptly forgot about the whole thing. 4 days later, on a Monday morning, in the middle of a quiet, friendly chat in an office, I suffered what was later diagnosed to be a heart attack, coronary occlusion, and was taken to the hospital. I did not believe it was a heart attack and had no idea what it was. I did not believe it was a heart attack and had no idea that it was until I was informed of it after an examination in the hospital, complete with EKG. It took much persuading that it was so, and for a reason. In every physical examination I ever had, including two the previous week by two different insurance doctors, my heart was always pronounced very sound, with such statements as, "You'll never have to worry about your heart," and "That's one thing you won't die of, any heart problem." My mind was thoroughly conditioned against that possibility. It seemed that my mind would not accept the precognitive interference of a heart attack. This seemed impossible. Therefore, it selected a catastrophe that was possible in its memory experience, i.e., an airplane crash. The mind takes the nearest seem-alike. Thus, the heart attack came through in the form of an airplane crash, which was acceptable as a possibility. The 4 weeks in the hospital were eased by use of suggestive therapy on recorded tape, which worked wonders with my morale and seemed to speed my recovery. No experiences of a psychic nature came about in the hospital, which I finally deduced was caused by the sedatives, or barbiturates, which were given to me every 3 hours. At home, my recovery followed a standard procedure with no recurring symptoms to date. Wow. Sweet dreams, Delaney. It goes without saying that I observed very intently after that when the valve decided to open. Okay, it goes without saying that I observed very intently after that when the valve decided to open. Each time the vision presented, phys- each time the vision presented, fitted exactly with events that occurred days, months, or years later. Examples of these include a visual description of the interior of a house, including paint and trim, that was selected by my wife for us to use for us in a southern city. I recognized it immediately, and it was identical to the description in the notes made 2 years previously. Most unusual was the fact that at the time of the precognition, we had no plans or intention of moving south. Mm, Okay. Another was that 5 minutes before the broadcast of a recorded program, the valve opened and I saw the tape breaking sharply and the reels running wildly. Some 10 minutes later, during the broadcast, the tape did break and was hastily reset. Such breakage had never happened before during a broadcast, so this was not a common concern. Further, I had made all editing splices myself and knew they were right or they were tight. The break was caused by a splice made by someone else who had used the tape previously. A third, in the office, the valve opened to reveal a red light with the words oil pressure. An hour later, driving home in a nearly new car, the red oil warning light flashed on. Again, this was not a subconscious worry. The car had less than 500 miles since it was new and had just been checked. The new car had an oil leak, something one does not expect or worry about with a new automobile. There are some 18 more, all of which are personal incidents of varied magnitude, previewed via the valve and later coming to pass exactly as noted, allowing for minor errors in interpretation. This is totally like that mail slot. To date, a pattern of consistency has been established. H, hissing sound, plus V, valve opening sensation, equals F, future event vision. On the premise that this formula has been applicable and proved 22 times, what of the other cases listed in the notes where F has not yet taken place? Without further comment, here are some where the formula has not been proved as of this writing. August 3rd, 1960, air hiss valve. An airplane passes overhead, obviously in trouble, with flaps and landing gear lowered. It crashes behind a nearby hill, and my family and I rush over to try to help. When we get there, the plane is burning slowly with a deep red glow. I recognize the glow and the slow burning as something different than an ordinary gasoline fire and warn the others to stay back so they will not be injured by it, as there is nothing we can do for the dead occupants. October 5th, 1961, or November 5th, 1961, air hiss, valve. I'm standing alone outside my house. The sky is mostly clear, with a broken cloud cover to the north. I see a group of aircraft emerge from the cloud cover, just above it. They approach, and I note that they are not typical aircraft or rockets. Behind the first wave is row after row of the strange aircraft, literally hundreds of them. They are not like any airplanes I have seen before. No wings are visible, and each machine is gigantic, some 3,000 feet across. Each is shaped like the head of an arrow, V-shaped, but with no fuselage, as in our swept wing airplanes. The V shape is not a lifting surface, but houses the occupants in 2 or 3 decks. They sail majestically overhead, and I feel a tingle of awe at the mighty power they represent. I also feel fear because I somehow know that these are not man-made. Hmm. October 20th, 1962. Air hiss and valve. I am with other people in a suburban street. Looking up, I see what appear to be airplanes through a large break in the clouds. I take a closer look and realize these are a type of aircraft I have never seen before, evidently powered by something other than propellers or jets. Impression is of a unique form of rockets, but not chemical. Three of the aircraft dive down in a descending turn, and I can see they have black sides and white square windows, but no wings to speak of. The three make a low pass over the nearby street. Houses and buildings collapse in their wake, not from bombs, but from something emitted from the machines themselves. We all dive for a ditch for safety. June 12th, 1963. Air hiss, valve. My family and I are in a situation where the whole population of the city we live in is trying to leave. Gasoline is unavailable. Electric power has been shut off. There is a great sense of fatality among everyone. It doesn't seem to be the product of atomic war, and there is no concern as to radioactive fallout. There is principally a feeling of doom and the breakup of civilization as we know it, due to something momentous having taken place, a factor beyond human ability to control. April 11th, 1964. Air hiss and valve. My family and I are in a large city, and there seems to be great trouble. Everyone is trying to leave. I leave what seems to be an apartment to try to find some way for us to get out into the country. Out in the street, the whole city is in a turmoil and panic, with cars stalled and jammed together, much like an anthill that has been disturbed. There are many more personal, general, specific, local, worldwide. Only time will bring confirmation. I hope some of them are hallucinations. I've had some dreams that make me feel like this, like like I'm leading groups of people to safety. Sometimes there's even like they're like airships around. They're not like they're more like ships, but they're in the air. And there's like what you would call aliens too there, or entities that I don't know what they were called. I've had that recurring dream for a while, but sometimes it's like we find underground safety, or always headed to some destination of mine that I have. Yeah, I also dreamed of 9/11 before that happened. And then when it happened, I just felt really scared. And I also believed after that that like I started having all kinds of crazy dreams about the world, and I believed them. And then when those dreams didn't come to pass, I sort of felt like an idiot. All right, so we're at 48 minutes. How long is chapter 12? It's tiny. We're going to do it. Okay. Mary, welcome in. Awesome. Hello, hello. Happy Thursday. Round Holes and Square Pegs, Chapter 12. Among the many mysteries encountered, there are several that stand out as being apparently unmotivated yet deeply profound. My only hope is that others, more technically or philosophically oriented, can perceive them in purpose and reason which I cannot. Here are a few of those which do not seem to be of locales 2 or 3. August 23rd, 1963, evening. I lay down to take a short nap, not for any extra physical activity, at 7:17 in the den on the couch. The moment I stretched out horizontally and closed my eyes, there was a tremendous soundless explosion. There was no time lag. It occurred about 2 seconds after I closed my eyes. The blast slammed me across the room and against the wall in the opposite corner, where I slid to the floor. My first thought was that there actually had been some kind of explosion in the house, as the light fixtures overhead seemed to be sputtering, throwing off blue sparks, then the wires themselves melting. The lights were turning off when I lay down, the room half dark. It seemed to me as if some huge short circuit had taken place in the wiring. There was a tingling sensation similar to electrical shocks, not like the vibrations I have mentioned so many times. Then I looked across my room. My physical body was still lying relaxed on the couch. I could see it plainly. It was then that I seriously considered another possibility. This might be death, true death, instead of the typical out of body experience. This situation was such an unusual thing. Perhaps I had died, my heart had stopped. I was still a little dazed from the explosion, but I was not afraid, nor did I panic. If this was death, so be it. Dang, I wonder what this guy's energy is like to be around. What do you look like? There's no pictures. Huh. I lay there in the corner for some time, trying to collect myself. I felt around under me, and I thought I felt the rug. I was not sure. At least something felt solid under me. Then I decided that I should try to get back in the physical, even if I failed. I would lose nothing by trying. With a great effort of will, I floated upward and over to the couch, then down. There was a wrenching effect, and I found myself half in my physical body. I realized the half condition, wiggled and squirmed, just as you would wiggle your hand to put on a glove. In a moment, I was whole again. I sat up physically and turned on the light. Everything seemed normal. The house was quiet. My body seemed normal, except that I was covered with goose pimples. I was quite shaken by the experience and still don't know what caused it and why. Was it an explosion of non-physical category? Was it an internal thing in me, or was it the effect of some outside force? In retrospect, there seemed to be nothing unusual in my physical, emotional, or mental condition at the time to trigger it. In analysis of the best recall I can muster of the instant of the explosion, it was as if some stray beam had swept through the room and just happened to catch me impersonally in its path, the effect of which was to blow me out of the physical. Following this thought, I got the impression that the beam was a product of some experimental device not fully developed by the researchers who were testing it, i.e., all of the effects were not known to them. It strikes an associative memory relationship with the three-way device experience. May 5th, 1959, afternoon. Today I learned about a strange device that is supposed to work three ways. About 5, I decided to try working a formula for the condition 1-20/LQ. I lay down on the bed, thought of the force field diagram, then started the 20 count. I did not seem to be achieving any result and then turned my head. My eyes were open and I glanced at the sun through the window. The day was sunny and the window was to the west. Immediately, the vibrations faded in, and I closed my eyes and lay back. The vibrations were a tingling in the back of my head. I followed the jaw movement procedure, and they seemed to get stronger or weaker depending on my position, as expected. Finally, I determined the peak tuning position of my jaw. This is the way I can express it. The vibrations were strong in my head, a little too strong, so I moved them down into my chest, then experienced placing them in various parts of my body. That is to say, making them stronger in a given part. Dang, the biofield. Each time they passed over my lower right side, I got a burning sensation, either in the liver, kidney, or lower right colon. Foreign body or chemical there. Foreign body or chemical there? It's a question mark in parentheses. This had happened before, although I do not remember mentioning it. I mentally wanted upward, and I floated up. Some stray thought must have come forth, because I immediately rolled in the air and dove through the floor. I momentarily heard a band playing, like tuning past a radio station on the dial. Then I was standing in an unfinished house with no windows installed as yet, and materials and scraps laying around on the rough floor. Through the windows was a rural countryside, trees and fields, and the house was evidently in the side of a hill, looking down into a slight valley and onto a low hill on the other side. I looked down, and there was a device, about 18 inches long, on the floor. It appeared to be laid there just temporarily while the operator went to lunch. I picked up the device curiously, never having seen anything like it. It was rod like, with three attachments spaced along it. I held it up and looked along the rod, and inadvertently it aimed it at a man standing on a patio outside the open window whom I hadn't noticed before. Nothing happened. And then the man turned to notice me. He moved out of sight for a moment, then entered through a doorway to the right and came up to where I was standing. He smiled, and to my best recall, appeared to be perfectly normal. Seeing the device in my hand, he indicated that he would show me how to use it. Pointing to the tube, an open-ended cylinder on the front of it, he showed me how to focus the device by moving the tube or cylinder back and forth, away for a narrow beam and toward you for a wide, evidently more gentle beam or ray. He then told me to point it through another window opening where a second man outside was talking steadily and animatedly with someone outside our range of vision. He said to push the cylinder forward for a narrow beam. I did, and pointed the device at the man outside just as you would use a rifle. I saw nothing, no beam or ray emitted from the device. However, the man beyond the window opening opening instantly, slumped in his chair as if he were dead. I turned to my host, frightened and worried that I had unintentionally killed the person outside. He smiled and told me to point the device again at the unconscious man outside, this time pulling back on the focusing device to produce a wide beam. I did, and the unconscious man sat up and resumed his conversation as if nothing had happened. This is creeping me out a little. My host then led me outside, and I asked the second man if he had felt anything. He stopped his conversation, looked at me puzzled, and said no, he hadn't. I asked him if he remembered going to sleep or any lapse of time, and again he replied in the negative and turned away to continue his conversation. The man who was my host looked at me and smiled, then took me over to the other side of the house, overlooking the valley, indicating that he would show me another thing the device could do. He pointed toward the distance. A small fire was burning brightly on the hillside, some 300 yards away, with smoke curling up into the sky. He told me to use the narrow beam and aim at the fire. I did, and immediately the fire went out. The flame shut off, as if suddenly extinguished. The smoke held for a moment or so longer, then it too was gone. I grew very excited about the gadget. This is like the gadget that Professor Dumbledore gives Ron. Sort of. I grew very excited about the gadget and asked my host to describe it to me. He did gladly. It was composed of three parts, he told me. The cylinder was a focusing device, which I understood. In the middle was a spiral coil, which he said was the power source. Behind the power source were three fin-like plates, like those found in a rectifier, which he explained were not too important in that they were only shields to protect the user. He rubbed his thumbs over them, and they bent, showing their flexibility. He asked me if I was sure I understood. I replied that the affair looked like a large triode, the closest thing I could think of resembling the layout pattern. He nodded excitedly and replied, "Yes, a triode." Feeling that I had to go and couldn't stay longer, I thanked him for all the information, and he said he would see me again at Unremembered. My mind recognized the place, evidently, and I said yes. The Cadena Azul. Blue Cadena. Is that like head? Cadena Azul. This was a product of my South American visit, and it seemed a natural way to say whatever I was trying to say, Blue Network. Cool. My host started to nod yes, then gave me a blank, uncomprehending look, and I realized that my impression was right, but that he didn't understand the Spanish term. I then went back to the unfinished room and took off upward with a stretch leap. I went up what seemed to be only 2 or 3 floors, then stopped. The place looked like my office room, but was empty. No furniture, no couch, dust on the floor and windows, and no physical body. I realized this was the wrong place, time, question mark, that where I wanted to be was still up. I started up again, through the ceiling, and after 8 or 10 floors, emerged to my proper office room, sank down into my physical body, had a little difficulty with one arm, then merged completely. I sat up and opened my eyes. The clock indicated 1 hour, 5 minutes time lapse. I sketched the device, then started these notes. The device that puts people to sleep, wakes them up, and puts out fires. Someday I'll try to build the device. I wish that there was a picture of what he drew in here. Dang. So cool. March 11th, 1961, night. ... And I thought I had made a normal return to the physical. I opened my eyes and I was in a strange bed. A strange woman was beside the bed, and she smiled as she saw me awaken. An older woman stood behind her. They expressed happiness that I had finally come to, that I had been ill for a long time, but that now I would be all right. They helped me get out of bed, and I was dressed in some sort of robe, like a dressing gown. Their dress seemed normal to me, and I knew for sure I wasn't the person they thought I was. I tried to tell them this, but they only humored me and seemed to think I was still in some form of delirium. I asked what day it was, and then only and they only smiled understandingly as if I wasn't yet fully oriented. I wasn't. I was going to ask for a calendar, then decided it was better simply to find out the year. I asked the younger woman, who seemed to be my wife, or the body's wife, and she replied that it was 1924, according to the Greek question mark method of calculating time. I was sure that I couldn't stay there any longer, and despite their strong objections, went out a door into the open air. I stood there and tried to move upward, and I got the feeling I had to move up, very far up. I tried to take off, but they were holding on to me. Nothing happened, and I became worried. I knew I was in the wrong place. I then remembered the breathing trick and started to breathe in the gasping manner through half-closed lips. I started to rise slowly up above the building, which was U-shaped, still feeling them trying to restrain and hold me back. I breathed hard and fast, faster, and I moved faster until the familiar blue blur was all around me. Suddenly I stopped, and I was high in the air over a landscape of countryside dotted with houses. It looked familiar, and I thought I saw what was our house and buildings between road and river. I dove for the house, and in the next moment I was merging with the physical. I sat up, whole again, and looked around gratefully. I was in the right place. August 17th, 1960. This was a misdirected attempt to understate by an incalculable margin. Incalculable. I went through the 1 to 20 LQ procedure at around 11:30 p.m. in the bedroom. I went out with the thought of visiting Agnew Bonson and started on the wind-blown type of trip, but returned to the physical almost immediately, or so I thought. I wasn't lying in bed, I was standing. The room wasn't my room. A man, big and round-shouldered, was supporting me on my left. He was much taller than I, and his shoulders seemed to glisten. Holding me up on my right was a young girl. They were forcing me to walk around the room, and I was having difficulty walking, so they were half supporting me under each arm. I heard them comment about my hands, that there was something wrong or unusual about them. They were not unfriendly, but I knew positively that I was in the wrong place. I kept my head, luckily, and employed the stretch and shot up out of wherever and whatever I was, and after only a moment or two, merged again with the physical body. I looked around carefully, physically, before I moved. I was back in my own physical body, my own bedroom. It was a long time before I turned over and was able to get to sleep. Wow. Hmm. November 23rd, 1960, night. This was a most unusual and vivid experience, and I don't know if I want any more like it. I went to bed late, very tired, around 2 in the morning. The vibrations came in promptly without induction, and I decided to do something in spite of the need for rest. Maybe this is rest. That's in parentheses. After moving out easily and visiting several places in quick sequence, and remembering the rest need, I attempted to get back to the physical. I thought of my body lying in bed, and almost immediately I was lying in bed. But I quickly realized something was wrong. There was a box like contraption over my feet, evidently to hold the sheet off my legs. There were two people in the room, a man and a woman dressed in white, whom I recognized as a nurse. They were talking softly, a short distance from the bed. My first thought was that something had gone wrong, that my wife had discovered me in some kind of coma and had rushed me to the hospital. The nurse, the sterile atmosphere of the room, and the bed all supported this. But something still didn't feel right. After a moment, the two stopped talking, and the woman, or nurse, turned and went out of the room, and the man approached the bed. I grew panicky because I didn't know what he was going to do. I became more so as he bent over the bed and held gently but firmly onto each of my arms at the biceps and looked at me with bulging, glistening eyes. Worst of all, I desperately tried to move but could not. It was as if every muscle in my body were paralyzed. Inwardly, I writhed in panic, trying to get away as he brought his face down closer to me. Then, to my utter astonishment, he bent over further and kissed me on the cheek, and I actually felt his whiskers. The glistening in his eyes was tears. He then straightened up, released my arms, and walked slowly out of the room. Through my terror, I knew that my wife had not taken me to the hospital, that this man was a stranger, that I was again in very much the wrong place. I had to do something, but all the will I could muster didn't have any effect. Slowly, I became aware of a hissing in my head, much like a strong steam or air hiss. Through some dim knowing, I concentrated on the hiss and began to pulsate it, i.e., modulate it soft and loud, and made the pulsating go faster and faster in frequency, and in a few moments it had accelerated to a high order vibration. I then tried to lift out and succeeded smoothly. Moments later, I was converging with another physical body. This time, I was cautious. I felt the bed. I heard familiar sounds outside the room. The room was dark when I opened my eyes. I reached for the place where the light switch should be, and it was there. I turned on the light and sighed with great, great relief. I was back. I wonder what this guy's diet's like. June 7th, 1963, night. After some time, I started to leave, and outside the house, I met a woman who was flying also. And she reminded me that we would be late in getting back. Where, I don't know. And that we might have trouble getting in. Then we approached what seemed to be a large institution. Hospital? Question mark. And happily went directly through a door without opening it, apparently to avoid the guard who was waiting, and a bed check or reporting in late, which implied some penalty. Inside, we split up, and immediately a man, friendly doctor type, said that he would take care of me, that I should wait in the second office to the right. I did, although I got confused about which office because each of the offices had several people in them in deep conversation, and I remained unnoticed. However, I waited in the second, and finally the man entered and examined me, and stated that I would need treatment. He then spoke of titration and a treatment rising to 1500 cc, then receding back again to normal, whatever that means. Okay, I don't know either. I asked him why the treatment was necessary, and he replied, so that the universe, or humankind, can develop and improve. I again asked why, meaning why the need for improvement, and he didn't answer. I was somewhat apprehensive about the treatment. Then, slowly thereafter, I felt the need to return to the physical and did so without incident. July 13th, 1961, afternoon, night. On a visit to Cape Cod, I arrived in Hyannis, somewhat tired. I wonder where Hyannis is. Oh, in Cape Cod. And lay down in the afternoon for a rest. Upon relaxation, the usual lifting out process occurred, and I found myself drifting over the back area of a house near the garage. A dog was in the yard, a large German Shepherd type, and when he noticed me, he barked excitedly. A man came around the edge of the house, right side, facing the rear, pulled a gun, and aimed it at me. I withdrew hurriedly before I could realize that perhaps bullets didn't hurt me. I returned, lay in bed, and thought it was over, and was able to recall no more than the fact that the man seemed very tall. That evening, after going to bed, the surge came again and I drifted out. I was floating over several houses, trying to decide what to do. Then suddenly, this tall man appeared in front of me. The same one, in parentheses. It wasn't a question mark, the same one. And stopped me merely by being in my way. I got an impression of calm strength. He asked me why I wanted to see the president. I was surprised at first because I didn't have any particular desire to see Eisenhower. That was my mind's connotation of president. But I made up an idea of a plan for peace and told the tall man about it. He then asked how we can be sure you are loyal to the United States. I replied, still confused, that I was sure proper information on me was in Washington. He then said, after a moment, that I could not see the president at this time. I consented agreeably and returned. Laying in bed, thinking it over, I first realized that Eisenhower was no longer president, of course. I also suddenly had the very deep conviction that Kennedy had a psychic bodyguard, or rather mind guard. I then realized that Kennedy might be there in Hyannis that weekend. I got up and went downstairs, found the local paper, and on the front page was the story that Kennedy was arriving in Hyannis that afternoon. I had not seen a paper before the past 2 days. These represent a sampling of the many events that defy classification, especially in terms of plain everyday dreams. It may be that each is but a fragment of a living mural, someday to be seen in its entirety. I hope one does not have to die to obtain the total view. Wow! This is so good. Every chapter is so little, but dang. It's getting to be that lunchtime for me. Oh, we just passed the 222. Oh my gosh, that's wonderful. So yeah, I'm going to call it right here. And we'll get into 13, a karmic number, 13, next time I go live. I appreciate you. Thank you for hanging out with me. And yeah, I wish you wonderful Thursdays or whenever you find this. And I thank you. And I'll see you so soon. Mwah. Until then, thank you.